It certainly seems to be significant in terms of the fact that when it's a warplane, Ukraine has been using drones since, well, for the last few months. So the ability to get through Russia's supposed air defense with a warplane as opposed to a drone, I think is fairly significant. They've managed, if the reports are to be believed, it's a command post in the Belgorod region as well. So that's also fairly significant because it seems to have been a direct hit. So I would say certainly that it is something that is building up the process as well. It's not just drones anymore. It is a one-off, of course, so whether Ukraine actually has the capacity, but I think that if anything, it's a signal at the moment saying we can do this, and we have the Mirages coming, we have the F-16s coming. Yes, this is just the beginning, potentially.
And there's been a lot of discussion from people like yourself, from military experts, who've been calling on a relaxation of the attitude towards Ukraine in terms of using longer range options deep in Russian territory. And this kind of adds to that narrative that this is potentially a way for Ukraine to turn the tide.
I have been advocating this, and yes, others have as well, in terms of the need for Ukraine to strike Russian territory. What we're seeing is that Ukraine struck Belgorod. Belgorod is obviously on the border with Russia, and the Americans, sorry, the Russia-Ukrainian border, and the Americans at the moment, along with the Belgians and a few others, seem to be averse at the idea that Ukraine can go any further into Russian territory. I would advocate that it should be allowed to, because ultimately we've seen that Russia has started to move its forces back into Russian territory, even further away from the border, but it still has the capacity to be able to hit Ukraine from there. So again, I think that Ukraine should, so long as they are military targets and they do not target civilians, then Ukraine should be allowed the ability to hit any Russian military target that it has the capacity to reach, in my opinion.
And there's been further humiliation for Vladimir Putin in the last few days. Ukraine hit one of Russia's newest warplanes with a kamikaze drone. It was a Su-57 fighter in the Astrakhan region, if I'm saying that correctly. At the same time, Putin's been talking quite openly about the meat grinder of Russian losses. So it seems to be a confusing time for people assessing where Putin thinks he is in this war.
Well, it certainly is. I don't think we need to worry too much about where Putin thinks he is in this war. Putin, I think, having just said that, Putin, I think, is prepared to. This is existential for Putin. Well, maybe not existential, but certainly he is prepared to waste a lot more Russian lives in his escapade, let's say, in regards to Ukraine. So the fact that the Ukrainians have managed to hit an F-57, not an F-57, sorry, an Su-57 fighter plane is, I think, fairly significant. These planes are new, and that they are the stealth planes of the future for the Russian armed forces, and they cost in the range of $1.3 billion. So it is a significant target. And again, getting to Astrakhan is a challenge. So the Ukrainians have done fairly well with a suicide drone. There's also been examples of a tugboat being hit in Taganrog in Crimea. So again, the Ukrainians seem to be, as they have been for the past few months, taking the war to Russia.
So how do you see things playing out in the days and weeks ahead? No one has a crystal ball, but do you think Ukraine will be attempting more of this kind of tactic, possibly versus the warplane strategy that may have been used in the last 24 hours? Is it still drones that are their best form of attack for the time being?
I mean, I don't, as a political scientist, I never like making predictions because 99% of the time we're incorrect. I'm not in the Ukrainian High Command, so I can't say for definite, and I'm not a military specialist, but I would assume that Ukraine will continue these drone attacks primarily because especially if they're suicide drones, it doesn't take away Ukrainian lives, and Ukraine does need its soldiers on the front line. So it's certain, and fighter pilots as well. It doesn't have a lot of fighter jets at the moment. The F-16s probably won't start arriving until fairly later in the summer, if not until the autumn. So I think at the moment we will continue to see Ukraine using drone strikes against Russian military facilities and Russian infrastructure as well.